On today's Hiwatt soundbite, we're getting better results by breaking the rules. Now, I love getting up to this in the studio. Setting up a couple of large diaphragm condenser microphones in a stereo configuration like this, bringing an acoustic instrument in and just experimenting. Putting your multi-track in record and just start noodling around and throwing down ideas. Well, this inspired me to really stop everything for just a moment and address something that I think is very, very important. We're talking about the rules of recording, okay? Some of you can probably relate to this, but right out of high school, I went to a full-time 2-year recording arts program. And it was a very good thing that I did because, of course, I grew up on a ranch, so I knew all kinds of stuff about tractors and cows, but I knew nothing about audio and the way sound propagated in a room and all these different concepts, right? So going to that full-time 2-year program was a critical thing for me to do. And of course, throughout that curriculum, oh man, I learned so many different concepts and theories and sort of guidelines to follow in the studio. And some of those are absolutely critical. There's no question that as a recording engineer, to be able to walk into a recording studio and have a band show up and be able to pull everything together and put that session together in a really good way, yeah, you're gonna have to have a fundamental understanding of some basic concepts in the studio. Things like how sound propagates in a room and why it does what it does and why a condenser microphone sounds different than a dynamic and so on. So a lot of the theory that I was learning throughout that 2-year curriculum was absolutely critical and a foundation of what it was to go into the studio and record. But tons of ideas were these kind of rules, so to speak, that were put in place. And the kinds of rules I'm talking about, things like the 3-to-1 rule when using multiple microphones on the same source. The idea that if you've got a lead microphone maybe 10 inches from that source, that if you're going to blend another microphone into that sound, that second microphone should be introduced at 30 inches away from that source. A 3-to-1 rule. If you've got that microphone just 5 inches from that source and you want to introduce another mic, if you follow the 3-to-1 rule, you would not put that second microphone any closer than 15 inches. Okay, so why did I ever hear about the 3-to-1 rule? Well, mostly it's to steer me clear of any phase issues between those microphones. As engineers, we're well aware that by introducing multiple microphones to the same source, there's going to be a phase relationship that each one of those microphones has to that source. And when you combine those microphones together, those phase issues are going to start interacting in a big way. And sometimes that can be a really good thing, and sometimes it can be a really bad thing. The 3-to-1 rule is generally put in place to sort of steer you clear of dealing with any kind of major phase issues. So that's just one as an example. Another rule or guideline is like the 12-inch, 12th fret rule when recording acoustic guitars. Just the guideline and understanding that if you put that microphone approximately 12 inches away from the guitar and you point it at the 12th fret, you're probably going to get a pretty decent sound from that guitar. So when I finally finished that 2-year full-time program in the recording arts, and I busted out of that and I landed myself my first job as an assistant engineer, it really wasn't until then that I understood just how important all of these rules are to acknowledge and understand, but that you absolutely cannot take them too literally. In other words, all of these rules are sort of meant to be broken. We're talking about recording engineering, not structural engineering, right? There's a major, major difference. In the world of structural engineering, they absolutely have to follow rules and guidelines because that bridge they build must meet a certain specification and requirement, right? Well, in the recording business, it's so subjective that you can put all these rules into place, but really where the fun starts in the studio is total experimentation. I absolutely encourage you to understand and recognize what some of these rules and kind of guidelines are in the studio. But I equally encourage you to break those rules, just about every one of them, because it isn't until you really start breaking these rules and messing around with the experimentation side of stuff that you really start to learn. I basically spent my whole career, 30 plus years, just breaking rules. And, there are certain guidelines that I definitely follow when I go into the studio, but I would always try and keep a very open mind. Like the proximity effect, that incredible thing that happens with a cardioid microphone. When you get closer to it, the bass increases exponentially, right? And it's just this incredibly cool thing that happens to a cardioid microphone. So the very first time I learned about the proximity effect, it was theoretical. It was out of a book. And really, to a large degree, it was sort of being set up with negative connotation. It was just something that wasn't really a good thing. And of course, it wasn't until I got into the studio and started working with microphones and hearing what that sounded like, that proximity effect, that I sort of made a decision in my brain that this is an awesome thing, this thing called proximity. I mean, I don't know why I was kind of taught that this is such a negative. When I come into the studio and I put a pair of headphones on and I set up a couple of mics, oh man, what an amazing concept proximity is. If I stand back here and I play the same little guitar thing that I've been doing, say like, what is that, 16 inches away from the mic, something like that. Sounds kind of cool, right? If I get right up to these mics where I'm almost touching them, oh man. As opposed to back here. Totally different sound, right? So in certain situations, that proximity effect can be a real negative when recording an acoustic guitar. Like this E string can become really loud when you get too close to a microphone. But at the very same time, if you're processing the crap out of this guitar signal and you're doing it as you're recording it, then a lot of those cool kind of artifacts that are coming from some of these crazy things like proximity can really become a positive. One of the single most attractive things of being a recording engineer that has always appealed to me is the idea that, yeah, there's some fundamentals here, but there are no rules. And the more you kind of open your mind and look into that recording session as an opportunity to try and experiment and maybe come up with something brand new to you that you've never experienced before, that is when it gets really exciting in the studio. So I encourage each and every one of you, yeah, absolutely take that kind of fundamental knowledge into the studio. But a lot of those kind of rules that have been put into place, treat them more as a guideline, a place to start. Because by evidence of my own experience, I believe that the more rules you break, the better results you're going to get.